How's it going, everybody? Today we're covering aeromedical horizons. We're talking about aeromedical and how it applies to aviation. All right, here's the outline. Here's how we're going to hit it. We'll start with an introduction, who I am. We'll get into aeromedical and we'll do a Q&A at the end. We're going to keep this one relatively short, probably between 15 and 20 minutes. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask throughout the entire presentation. All right, who am I? My name is Monty. I'm a flight instructor, U.S. Army veteran, former airborne ranger, and my passion now is helping you earn your wings. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover aeromedical. That's the number of health and physiological factors that can influence a pilot's ability to fly safely. And why do we care? Because many of these factors not only affect the health and well-being of the pilot, but can quickly lead to in-flight emergencies. And we're going to cover hypoxia, hyperventilation, middle ear and sinus problems, spatial D or spatial disorientation, motion sickness, carbon monoxide poisoning, fatigue and stress, dehydration, alcohol and drugs, nitrogen and scuba diving, and the I'm Safe checklist. Okay, let's start with hypoxia. What is hypoxia? It's a lack of oxygen in the brain. And that is not good because we humans need oxygen to survive. There are 4 types of hypoxia that we study in aviation. There's hypoxic hypoxia, hypemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, and histotoxic hypoxia. Now, hypoxic hypoxia, that's a mouthful, is when you're up at altitude and the amount of oxygen in the air just isn't enough for us to really get enough air or oxygen in our brain. Hypemic hypoxia has something to do with your blood. If there's something causing your blood the inability to use oxygen, that's hypemic hypoxia. Histotoxic hypoxia is if you are taking some sort of chemicals like alcohol or drugs that are taking the place of the oxygen or making it difficult for you to use oxygen. Stagnant hypoxia is my favorite. That's if you're performing high G maneuvers and the blood is pooling down at your legs and you are unable to pump all the blood to your head and you take a nap. Again, those are hypoxic, hypemic, stagnant, and histotoxic hypoxia. Some symptoms of hypoxia are euphoria, narrowed vision, difficulty concentrating, and more. And if you guys have ever seen the Air Force do their hypobaric chambers, they will simulate conditions at high altitude, take off their gas masks, and show you how ineffective you become without oxygen. And at different altitudes, you only have a limited time of useful consciousness. At 40,000 feet, you have between 15 and 20 seconds of useful consciousness. And so that's why in the airlines, they tell you to put on your own mask first before helping any kids or anybody you're traveling with. The treatment for hypoxia, if you think that you might be suffering from hypoxia or if your passengers might be suffering, is to use supplemental oxygen immediately and get down to a lower altitude. Some things to prevent hypoxia. At 12,500 feet altitude, if you are flying at that altitude for more than 30 minutes, you should be using supplemental oxygen. And that's 12,500. At 14,000 feet, the pilot and crew need to be on oxygen. And then at 15,000 feet, everybody in the aircraft needs to be provided with supplemental oxygen. Let's talk about hyperventilation. Now, this is essentially overbreathing. If somebody is very anxious or nervous, they might start to hyperventilate. And this is an excessive loss of carbon dioxide from the blood. And it's very similar in symptoms to hypoxia. The way we treat it is we want to breathe normally, talk to the passenger, talk to the person who's hyperventilating, have them breathe into a paper bag or talk out loud. And if you're not sure if it's hyperventilation or hypoxia, then descend, get down to a lower altitude and land the plane. Let's talk about middle ear and sinus problems. If there's a differential pressure, if there's a change in air pressure between, the outside or where you're flying and the inside of the middle or the inner ear or the middle ear, that can cause extreme pain and discomfort in your passengers or in your pilot. You might have a reduction in hearing sensitivity. And the way you treat this is by chewing gum, stretching your jaw, or blowing out on your nose if you're descending. If you have a sinus infection or if a sinus problems, if you're, congested, this can make it a lot worse. It can be really difficult to clear out your ears, and it can get really, really painful. And so the treatment is slow your descent rate, so descend relatively slowly, so the pressure change isn't so rapid. But ideally, if you are feeling sick, don't fly because you will have a bad time. Let's talk about spatial disorientation. Spatial D is when you are not oriented with your plane in space or where you are in space. And there are different ways that you can become disoriented. We'll talk about those later. But let's talk about our orientation systems in our body. We have our visual cues. We are very visual creatures. If we can see things, we can normally orient ourselves just fine. There's the somatosensory system, which is our sense of touch, and then the vestibular system, which are semicircular canals inside our ear. They're really cool. they are actually positioned in the three axes of rotation, just like our airplane. So we pitch about the lateral axis, we roll about the longitudinal axis, and yaw about the vertical axis. But we also have the same kind of axes in our inner ear. And there are little channels with fluid in them that when we turn or rotate, the fluid in the inner ear tickles these little hairs in our ear. And that gives us a sensation of, movement. The problem is we're essentially two-dimensional creatures down here on the surface of the planet, while flight is a three-dimensional activity. And so if we were to pitch or roll and then stay in that bank for a long period of time, eventually the fluid in our inner ear is going to settle down and the body will interpret that as though we are straight and level. It will become our new frame of reference. And so when we're ready to roll out of the turn, we roll out and our body's like, whoa, 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 we were level just a second ago. Now we're in a left turn. What's going on? And normally, if you can see outside, it's not a big deal. We can look outside and be like, okay, cool. Yeah, we're level with the horizon. My brain's just being weird. But if we remove those visual cues, like when we're flying in instrument conditions or in the clouds, it can be very disorienting and extremely difficult to overcome that sensation of like, I'm definitely turning right now. The brain will be like, we need to go back to level flight and we will re-enter the original bank and then just spiral down. So that's spatial disorientation. If you are in instrument conditions, so the cure is to focus on your instruments, disregard what your body's telling you, and fly the plane via instruments. Okay, let's talk about motion sickness. Some of the causes of motion sickness. This is essentially when your brain is receiving conflicting signals about what's going on in the aircraft. If you are looking down at a piece of paper while somebody else is maneuvering the plane, you can get disoriented, sick, and nauseous and uncomfortable. It can also be caused by anxiety and stress. Some symptoms of motion sickness include discomfort, nausea, dizziness, paleness, sweating, and vomiting. And it generally goes away after, some experience in the aircraft. You might feel nauseous your first couple of missions, your first couple of flights, but eventually your body starts to adapt. But I have noticed that if you take a pilot who is used to controlling the aircraft and you put them in another aircraft with a different pilot and they're no longer in control, very easy to become nauseous when you're not the one flying, when you're used to being the one flying. So something to consider. Some treatments for motion sickness: open your fresh air vents, look outside, don't look down, don't be texting and flying, and avoid unnecessary abrupt movements and fly smoothly. And this is a big one: take control of the airplane. If you're a pilot and you're feeling nauseous, a good way to overcome it is actually to be in control of the plane. So you know what's going to happen next. I'm sure you guys have experienced that when you're driving. You know every bump, every nudge of the controls. While if you're a passenger, you don't have any control over it. And so you're at the whims of the pilot in command or the driver in command. Let's move on to carbon monoxide poisoning. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas that's produced by the engine, and it can get into the cockpit through the heater or defrost exhaust leaks. And it's not good. It can actually cause hypoxia because the carbon monoxide prevents the hemoglobin from carrying oxygen to the cells. And that's the hypemic hypoxia that you might experience. It can also be caused by smoking. And so you'll experience headache, blurred vision, dizziness, drowsiness, and a loss of muscle power. Not fun. If you think you might be experiencing carbon monoxide poisoning, get down back on the ground as ASAP as possible, as they say. We do have some carbon monoxide detectors in the cockpit. They're little orange rings that will change color if there's carbon monoxide detected. If you think there's carbon monoxide, turn off your heater because that's likely how it's getting into the cockpit. Open your fresh air vents and use supplemental oxygen and land. Get down back on the ground. Moving on to fatigue and stress. There are two types of fatigue and stress that we talk about. There's acute and chronic. Acute fatigue is short term. If you just didn't get a lot of rest the night before and you're just really tired that day, that's acute fatigue. It's normal to just be tired. And then there's chronic fatigue where you are tired all the time and it might have some other underlying psychological cause. That's something you want to get treated by a physician. You might experience weakness, tiredness, heart palpitations, headaches, irritability, aches, and pains. If you are experiencing extreme fatigue, either acute or chronic, it is your responsibility as a pilot to postpone the flight and make good, safe decisions. I always say it's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. And then there's stress, acute and chronic stress. Acute is short term, chronic is long term. If you are feeling an overwhelming amount of stress, flying is not going to help you. It's going to make things worse. Flying can be a very relaxing activity, but if you're already in a bad mental state, it is not going to make things better. So don't fly. It is your responsibility, again, as pilot in command, to pre-flight yourself to make sure you're going to be making safe decisions. Let's talk about dehydration. As my drill sergeant used to say, you can die from that. This is a critical loss of water from the body. It can be caused by high temperatures, wind, humidity, or drinking diuretic drinks like coffee or soda. You can experience fatigue, headaches, cramps, tingling, sleepiness, dizziness, and a degraded physical and mental performance. When I was in the Army, we were on an 8-mile road march in the middle of August in Georgia. And I ran out of water and I refused to quit. The cadre were like, Monza, just quit. You're not going to make it. Well, I refused to quit. I finished the road march, got there, and then the medics were like, hey, that guy's going to die soon. And so they dragged me kicking and screaming to the hospital. My vision was all, tunnel vision, and I was not having a good time. Turns out my core temperature was 107 degrees. So not fun. Drink water and avoid dehydration. It's not good. Yeah. So prevention, stay hydrated, wear light clothes, keep the cockpit ventilated, and don't drink too much caffeine or soda, and definitely don't drink alcohol while you're flying or before you fly. Speaking of, let's talk about alcohol and drugs. As you guys know, alcohol impairs your judgment. It decreases performance and mental cognition. If you can't drink and drive, don't drink and fly. I mean, that's obvious. The general rule of thumb is you want to go 8 hours from bottle to throttle, 8 hours from your last drink, bare minimum. Same thing goes for drugs. Guys, don't do meth, please. Meth is bad. My wife works at the hospital and she's always telling me, oh my God, don't do meth. But also be careful about the kind of medication that you take before you go fly, because medication that can make you drowsy can be hazardous. Also, you'd be surprised what combining some medication and altitude do. Even though you might feel good on the surface, flying with certain medication can be particularly hazardous at higher altitudes. So check out the basic guidelines on the FAA website. Make sure that you're flying while you're healthy and not taking any medications that are going to prevent you from making good decisions. Now let's talk about scuba diving. You know what's funny? I was talking to my wife about this. I don't like the ocean. For some reason, the ocean just makes me uncomfortable, but I love space. If I were to be eaten by a whale in the ocean, terrible day. But if I were to be eaten by a space whale, I would love that. That'd be the best way to go. For those of you that enjoy scuba diving, you have to be aware that scuba diving significantly increases the nitrogen dissolved in the body. And if you ascend very rapidly, you can get something called the bends. I think it's called decompression sickness. And then going up in an airplane after going scuba diving can make that worse. If you do go scuba diving, the general rule of thumb is at least 12 hours, but 24 hours if you're going up above 8,000 feet. Short answer, wait 24 hours after scuba diving before you go fly. Now let's talk about pre-flighting the pilot. We always use a checklist for pre-flighting the aircraft. We walk around the airplane in the same manner every time we go fly to make sure that the plane is safe. So we're going to do the same thing for the pilot. We're going to use the I'm safe checklist. And this is just to make sure that we are safe to fly. First, we start with illness. Am I feeling sick? Medication. Am I taking any drugs that might prevent me from flying safely? Stress. Am I experiencing a major life event, death in the family, something like that? That's going to prevent me from making good, safe decisions. Alcohol, 8 hours bottle to throttle. Have I had any alcoholic drinks in the last, 8 hours, 24 hours? Fatigue, did I get a good night of sleep last night? And then emotion, I like to add eating at the end of this one. I think emotion could go with stress, but emotion and eating. Did you get a good breakfast before you flew? And the other side, have you eaten too much? That's not a fun situation to be in when you've had too much to eat and you have to go fly. So eat a good balanced breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever you're doing, and then go fly. Make good decisions. Be good pilots. Okay, that covers our aeromedical discussion. I know it was really quick, 15 minutes, right on the nose. Awesome. Love to open it up for questions. And Amelia, thanks for coming in. I think this is your first time here. Thanks for showing up.
Yes, it is. Thank you.